They are beautiful, colorful, they are good for health, but they are also very dangerous. But actually they are helpful, and their kingdom is complex, mysterious, and wonderful. They are mushrooms. Lately, I have been very interested in fungi and mushrooms. I'm even taking a course of mycology to learn more about them and reading many books on the subject, which is very vast. There is a lot to learn about their amazing kingdom. Fungi and mushrooms are all around. There are some mushrooms in my area in Florida, but I traveled anyway to North Georgia in autumn and I found a lot of different kinds. When you look at a mushroom growing out of the ground, you're looking only at a part of a fungus. The rest of the organism is underground and consists of a network of microscopically thin threads, which is spread through the soil. Because of my big interest in fungi and mushrooms, I wanted to talk with Dr. Andrew Swenson, professor of biology at the State College of Florida. He loves mushrooms, and even if he doesn't consider himself as mycologist, he really is. He knows a lot about fungi and mushrooms.
They're different than a lot of other organisms, and they don't get a lot of attention. But the role they play in our ecosystem is immense, and so I think that people need to learn more about them.
How exactly fungi help trees?
A lot of mushrooms are what are called mycorrhizal, so they form relationships with the plant roots. The fungi, the fungal strands actually interpenetrate inside the cells of the root of the plant. And for a while there, they actually thought, when they first saw these things, they thought, wow, this fungus is attacking the plant, that there's some kind of negative relationship. Well, it turns out the plant and the fungus are interacting together and both are benefiting. It's a symbiotic relationship. So that often happens with plants like around here where the soil is really, really terrible. These pine trees have a hard time securing nutrients by themselves, but if they set up a relationship with a fungus, the fungus with its extracellular digestion really does a good job of acquiring nutrients. And so it can supplement the nutrients that the plant is getting by directly providing them to the plant's roots. In response, the plant, all the needles in the pine tree are producing sugar. They're producing, through chlorophyll and through photosynthesis, they're producing sugar. And so they feed the fungus extra sugar, and the fungus provides nutrients for the plant. So there's a really big relationship.
Each other.
They help each other. So they digest the components of their environment outside of their body, and then they bring those components back in individual cells. So they eat. They kind of like us. They have to eat. The only catch is they're eating things that are already dead. So the role in the ecosystem is also to recycle. to recycle all these nutrients back so that they get back into the system.
So fungi eats dead things?
Yep, they're called saprobes. Saprobic things eat dead things.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So, like this stick won't stick around very long. Well, this one might, but slowly these things are going to get infiltrated by fungi, and the fungi will eat this stick and convert it into its own biomass, will convert it into fungus. The little filaments called a mycelium that is all over the place under the ground. It's so microscopic we can't see it. What we see are the mushrooms that come up when that larger organism wants to reproduce. So it usually sends them up at the edge of its periphery. So that's why sometimes mushrooms come up as a circle. That's called a fairy ring sometimes, but that's the edge of the organism. So if you see a fairy ring, you know that's the size of the actual organism, because the fairy ring, the mushrooms come up at the edge, the outer edge, where it's growing, where it's most robust. And so the spores that come up, when the mushroom grows up, its goal is to spread its spores. And so the mushroom itself has a cap with gills, and it protects, and then gills, the surface of the gills has all a bunch of spores. And so those spores are the propagules. They're kind of like little mini eggs, not exactly, but they're propagules for the next generation. So once the gill opens up and those spores start dropping out, they get caught in wind currents and they can just travel everywhere. So the goal of the mushroom is to spread the spores as far away as it can. And so people talk about picking a mushroom, how it's bad. The mushroom would rather you pick it so that you can spread the spores and get them, spread wide and farther, rather than staying close to the parent, because it doesn't want to compete with its offspring. It wants its offspring to go further away. Put it this way, it doesn't hurt the organism to pick the mushroom.
It doesn't hurt them. Okay.
No, it's producing the mushroom for one goal, and that's to spread its spores. The actual organism is under the ground. That's where it's eating and living and doing its normal day-to-day activity. The mushroom doesn't eat. The mushroom is just an extra extension of the larger organism that's devoted to reproduction. It'd be nice to find a mushroom.
Yes.
This one's called Lactarius. When it's fresh, if you strike the gills, it produces a milk substance, so lacto. That's where it gets its genus name, Lactarius. So
And
beautiful when it's fresh.
you can eat it?
Some yes, some no. You can eat everything once. But yeah, it depends on the species of Lactarius.
So this one, if you eat it, you die, maybe, or you die for sure?
I don't know. There's not enough information about which one it is. The gills. Some of the things you use to identify the mushroom, you see if it has a ring or no. This one does not.
Oh.
You look at the color of the gills, which is hard to tell, but they look a little bit yellow. And a lot of times you get a spore print. So what you do is take the cap off, set it on a piece of paper, let it sit for 2-3 hours. The spores will drop, and the color of the spores will give you some insight into what species it is. So there's lots of diagnostic features. Many of them you do need a microscope to tell the difference.
So it's by the rings, basically, and the spores.
And the spores, the gills. A lot of times it's the attachment of the gills. Are they attached to the stem, or is there a gap? Some species there's a gap. Some species they attach.
And the color.
And the colors, of course, yeah. Yeah.
And they have females and males.
That's a tough question. In mushrooms, they have more than just males and females. They have thousands of sexes.
Oh, wow.
So let's just use a certain mushroom that has 100 different sexes. So you can't really refer to them as male and female because you run out of names after you get to 10 or 15. All you really need to be is have a different mating type. So there's many, many different mating types in mushrooms. So if you come up next to another mushroom that's a different mating type, you can mate. If it's the same mating type, you can't mate. So you just have to find a different mating type to mate.
And how do you find it?
On the surface of the little mycelium, the little fibers, there are proteins, and the proteins sort of give it a little tag that says I'm this and I'm that. And so the tags can then recognize each other, and they recognize each other as different mating types. In mushrooms, you just call them positive and negative, which indicates they're different.
If you say that there are different sexes, many sexes, then you have many different positives.
Right. So your positive could be a positive A, positive B, positive mushrooms. I don't know of many other groups that have that many different sexes. There are probably some other protists, single-celled organisms that have many sexes, but you don't see it as prolific in other organisms other than mushrooms. So, yeah.
That's pretty cool. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, we have learned a lot about mushrooms and fungi. We often think of fungi as organisms that cause disease and rot food, but actually they are not only extremely important for plants and trees, but as complex and dangerous as they can be, they are essential for the environment, and of course they are beneficial for people. I eat mushrooms in different ways at least twice per week. Here is a very simple vegan recipe that I share with you. Fungi make important contributions in managing disease in humans and animals. For example, antibiotics. As you probably know, penicillin is based on Mycelium, which is a genus of Ascomycetus fungi. So they influence the well-being of human populations on a large scale because they are part of the nutrient cycle in ecosystems. Since I started to be interested in mushrooms, my view of the forest has changed completely. Now I also look down when I'm walking in the woods. It is exciting to imagine that there is an underground world that I cannot see, which is as magical as the one I can see. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a peaceful day.